Hey everybody, here we are for the next edition of Get Ready for the Answer. I am producer, author, blogger, podcaster, and all those other things. Bobby Owsinski. You may know me from some of my books. You might know me from my podcast, and it says 520 episodes. It's more like 560 now, but nonetheless, you might like it. Lots of very interesting guests that we have. You might know me from my blogs, and you might know me from my courses. I hope you do. And if not, I hope you might visit them one day soon. So with that, let me tell you the reason for this is way back in December, I did a workshop and there were a huge number of questions, over 200, and I didn't get to them all, and I promised that I would. So I think this is the fourth edition of this, just answering questions. And today, it comes from the Awesome Mix Workshop. That's what we did back in December. So today I'm going to answer all of your audio recording questions. So again, what we try to do is break these up so they're in certain categories. And now today is all about recording. That's all. So let's get started. From Stephen, he says, is there any special approach or technique recommended for recording, mixing power chords for guitar, for genres like metal and similar styles? I can get what I think is great sound coming out of my monitors, but often it doesn't translate well to cell phones or earbuds. They tend to come out overly harsh from distortion and too much high end. Okay, so without hearing this, a couple things spring to mind. The first is you may be recording with too much distortion. What feels good and sounds good live doesn't necessarily record that well, and you'll find that if you back it off, it might sound better in a recording. This almost always tends to be true. And once again, being on the other side as a guitar player, knowing I set something up and go, yeah, this is really cool. And then going in and listening and going, oh, it's kind of buzzy. It's not exactly what I heard out there. So sometimes dialing it back a little bit really helps. Hopefully it doesn't affect the way you play. But again, many times, this is just the best way to do it. The second thing is, if you're doubling guitars, if you have a lot of different guitars, if they're all the same sound, this is one of the problems that you have. So it's not uncommon to have lots of guitar overdubs or lots of keyboard overdubs or whatever, and that's not a problem. Where the problems come in is if they all sound the same. So that's one of the reasons why studio players have traveled with lots of amplifiers and guitars, because every single overdub sounds different. And that way you can make it all fit together and sound actually bigger than if it was just a straight double with the same sound both times. So I would do both of those things before you actually do any more surgery to find out what's going on, because I think you might find that one or even both of those suggestions will really help a lot. All right, from Eric. Have you ever used two mics in a kick, like a Beta 52 in front and a Beta 91 inside simultaneously? Yeah, all the time. That's pretty much standard operating procedure, that you're going to use two mics. Beta 52 sometimes is the one that's inside, and a large diaphragm condenser like a U47 FET, F-E-T. That's always been a popular one for outside the bass drum. Also, sometimes there's a third mic, a sub-kick mic as well, that's placed there. I generally think that's overkill, and you shouldn't need it. Usually what happens is the kick gets too big at that point. But that being said, it's not uncommon to see all that. So yeah, two mics, it's a nice combination. Just make sure they're in phase, and then you'll be okay. Usually the one inside closer to the beater is getting you the click sound and getting you the definition. The one outside is getting you more of the body. But yeah, happens all the time. From Alan. Do you record with EQ or compression on, or do you mainly record flat with no EQ or compression? Okay, so here's the way this works. If you've been recording for a long time, have a lot of experience, and you usually record with the same gear, so the same microphones especially, and you know what everything sounds like and is supposed to sound like, at that point, you're usually better off recording with EQ and compression. Usually not a lot, just a little, and because you know what you're going for, and you know you're not going to want to change it. However, if you're just starting out and you don't have a lot, and I mean a lot, of really good experience, you're better off to record flat without any compression, without any EQ. Because remember, you can't take that stuff off later. And there's no undo. So if you record with some of this stuff and decide you don't like it later, you're out of luck. That's why you're usually better off, again, unless you have lots and lots of experience. I know many engineers that have their own microphones. They travel with their own microphones and preamps, and they know what everything is supposed to sound like. So they can tell right away, if something is off or if they're going for a particular sound. And, again, you have 25 years of experience. It makes it kind of easy. But until you get to that point, better off to record flat. From Jeremy. Is it worth going above 24-bit 48K for your master? Yes. Two things about this. 9624 is the standard today. It's been the standard for a long time. I cannot remember doing a project that was not at least 96K, and this is probably from 2002. So over 20 years, that's been the standard. So much so that usually if you're recording a major label project, you get a set of specs, delivery specs. So they're actually telling you what files you're supposed to deliver. And it's almost always 96K. Why 96K? Why 9624? Well, because Apple, for one, has been collecting 9624 masters since 2012, I think, 2013, for Apple Digital Masters, that program. And now you're finding this particular sample rate is, it's pretty much everywhere. It's going to get to the point at one point in time, sooner rather than later, where that will be the standard. Now, here's the difference. If you're recording specifically for television and film, that's 48K work. Eventually, it gets encoded down to 4824. So it's okay if you start there. It'll probably sound better if you start at 96K nonetheless. I would not record anything less than 96K, and I haven't, like I say, in 20 years. So that's some perspective on it. From Andre. I'm sending MIDI to an analog synth and recording it back to my DAW and noticing significant noise. Shall I be using a DI box, or in this configuration it's not necessary and the noise coming from something else? Well, the noise could be coming from different places. It could be the synthesizer. And especially if it's an analog synthesizer, it could be noisy. What I would do is try to find the sweet spot on the output volume control, because there may be some point where it's going to be the quietest. And, it's usually when you open it up a little bit, like at 4, 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there. Usually if you have it flat out, that's when it might sound a little noisy to you. Now, we can come back and say it could also be if you're recording directly into your DAW, into your interface, and maybe the interface is not, particularly high quality one. So again, you're getting it. Usually this is a case of gain staging, where you're turning it up too loud. You're turning something up too much, and that's giving you the noise. Will a DI help you? It might, but usually the reason why I use a DI is your signal is weak and you need it, and it's weak because maybe it's unbalanced into a balanced input. The impedance is wrong, something like that, and the DI box helps to straighten that out. So it could help, but again, the quality of the DI box is a big deal here. So if you have a real cheap DI, it might not help at all. Worth a try, but first I would just look at gain staging and getting the levels right and see if that'll help. Okay, from Leon. Is it okay to record and mix at 44K this day and age? And are there certain situations record and mix at 48K or higher for the industry? We just talked about this. There is no reason today to record at 44.1. Zero. None. Not at all. The only time this happened, the only time this was a good practice, was back in the beginning of digital recording. So we're going back into the 1990s here. And that's when we pretty much had 8-bit recording, 12-bit then, and 16-bit. And also what happened was everything was destined for CD, and CD was 44.1. And that's a long story how 44.1 was actually determined. We won't go there, but CDs are 44.1. And if you recorded at a different sample rate, the sample rate conversion sounded bad. Therefore, it was a good practice back 25 years ago to record a 44.1. Today, sample rate conversion is great. So you're not going to lose very much at all. If you record again, I suggest 96K, and I would never go below 48K, ever, ever, ever. There's no reason to. Just make sure you record it at 24-bit. You'll be okay. Okay, from Matthew. Will mixes be louder if we record at 96 kilohertz? No, they will not. They'll just have better definition, but you'll hear it more on certain types of music. So, for instance, if you have something that's very dynamic and acoustic, you're going to hear the difference between 96K and 48K. It'll sometimes it's dramatic, sometimes you can just tell the difference. If it's something like metal or a genre that's really loud, you might not hear it, or you might not hear it as much. You might not hear it just on speakers, computer speakers or something like that. When you get into better environments and better playback systems, then you generally hear it. But in everyday systems, you might not hear it as much. Still, so you don't get any advantage other than it sounds better, but you don't get any level advantage. From Sydney. What's the best way to record a band? One at a time or all at once? Well, all at once, generally speaking. Here's the caveat. If the players are good, if they've played together and they know the song, then, and they're studio-wise, in other words, they have some studio experience, then all at once will beat one at a time every single time. If the band doesn't know how to record in the studio or they don't play well together, then that's not necessarily going to be a good idea. Now, the need for a producer is more and more acute as you record with multiple players, because somebody has to be able to hear inside the song, inside the track of what's happening and say, well, wait a second, you guys aren't playing together. Or wait, you're playing it one way and you're playing it a different way. So that's usually up to a producer. And if you don't have that person, it's really hard to do it. But you'll get a better vibe and a better feel all at once. The other way is, of course, the way we usually do it in home studios is one instrument at a time. You usually get better recordings, more perfect recordings, but there's not as much feel. And, we buy feel in music. So that's the downside. From William. I know a lot of your tips are based on getting a good sound at the source. Yep. For example, moving mic position or changing mics. Yep. When producing electronic music, do you have any tips for how to know which sounds will fit the mix better? Well, as you go on, you should do this anyway. On any overdub, you play the new part and you listen and you think, how well does that sit in the track? Can I hear it? Is it being overpowered by something else? So you have multiple choices, and the choices would be, well, I can change the way it's played. I can change to a different register, maybe up an octave or something, or a different inversion. Or I could change the sound. So either or both will get you what you want. So this is even with electronic music. You're doing an overdub and you're thinking, does that all fit together? Where people go wrong is that they get an idea and they just put it down. And next thing you know, they have a big jumbled mess of sounds that all sound the same and they're all in the same range. And that just makes the rest of recording and producing and mixing just really, really hard. So better to get it as you're recording and you put it down and you think, okay, does that fit sonically? Does that fit production-wise, playing-wise, feel-wise, or is it being played correctly with the rest of the tracks? So those are really important, because if it's not, if you have a part that, even electronically speaking, electronic music, if it doesn't fit tempo wise, it doesn't fit, the accents aren't lining up or something like that, then you're asking for trouble later. Okay, from George. Is it best to record at the highest level in digital, not for loudness, but for resolution? No, not anymore. And again, let's go back 25 years or even more. At the beginning of digital, when we were talking 8-bit and 12-bit and then 16-bit recording, yes, you really wanted it to be loud. You wanted your recording to be as close to zero as possible. The reason why was, and it's the same thing with analog, you have a noise floor that's right here. The louder you record, the more above your noise floor is, so you don't notice the noise as much. And we're doing kind of the same thing in digital, where we're filling up the bits, as they would call it. So now that we're in 24 and 32-bit land, that no longer applies. You could record at relatively low level. It's not a great idea, but you could, and it'll sound fine. So no, there's no longer a need to record the highest level. I always recommend that you aim for like -10, -12, and if you get peaks that go to -6 or something, that's plenty. It's plenty loud. And the reason why I say you should be somewhere in that range is then you don't have to worry about boosting it up later. Sometimes if it's recorded too softly, then we have to use trim or clip gain or something like that. But generally, and you can just do this by eye. If you have, you have your lane here, and you have the waveform. If the waveform takes up about half of the lane, then usually that's a pretty good level that you can work with. From DeAndre, do poor recording input levels lead to overall poor mixes? Not necessarily. What they'll do is they'll lead to noise. So production-wise, that's not great. Poor recording input levels could, and again, it could be the way your preamps are set up, your inputs are set up, that you're just inducing noise. Or, and also the other thing is, in the analog domain, there are sweet spots where it just sounds better. So that means anything that's way down at 1 or 2 on the dial, you're far away from your sweet spot, so it probably won't sound as good as if you're up at 5 or 6 or 7, somewhere in there. And that's usually what we aim for, try to find the analog sweet spot and make everything else work around it. But it's not going to lead to bad mixes. From Elijah, when it comes to recording multiple vocal layers like a lead vocal and harmony over a melody, what are good levels for all the voices? Well, you can't say. It's an unknown, because every song is different. I'll give you an example. First of all, every song, every type of music, the arrangement is different. The voices would be different in every song. How many mix elements there are. So it's hard to say, and put it here at this level. Here's an example, though. If you're recording a cappella, well, then the lead and harmony might be at a different level than if you're recording with the band, because the vocals have to fit within the band, and they don't. They can, if they're a cappella, they can take up more space. So it's somewhat different. One of the things that I have a chart, it's a quick balance chart, mixing by meters, and it just tells you if you set your meters up, your master meter up, you solo up a track and you set it up at a certain level, then your levels come up pretty good. They're a good place to start. So usually what I tell everybody is, if you put the lead vocal, and now you're saying you have the kick and a snare, and you put that at -5, and if you have bass, and maybe it's -10, somewhere in there, and a lead vocal would be between -5 and -10, and the harmony might be -15, -10, -15, somewhere in there. And these are only starting places, but again, that's why mixing is difficult, because you can't just say do this and it will work all the time. No two songs are the same. Okay, from Sarah. I've recorded electric guitar using audio interface and check recording levels with the VU meter. The sound of the guitar is empty and thin, even though it hasn't sounded that way when played. What may be causing this narrow sound? Okay, I'm not sure exactly what you mean. There's some variables in here. The first variable is, are you saying that when you play and you didn't say whether it's electric or acoustic. Let's just say it's electric. Are you saying that it sounds good when you play it by itself, or you're playing it through an amplifier or not? See, again, these variables. Then we record it, it doesn't sound the same way. Well, if it's mic'd, for instance, maybe it's the mic. And the mic is not picking up what it should be. Wrong microphone, perhaps. Or a broken microphone, or a broken cable, or any number of things. If you're going direct, well, it might sound better if you had a DI box, and that will even out the impedance and give you a better impedance match, and it will just sound better. So, and checking with the VU meter isn't necessarily the best way these days. It's the way we did it back in the analog days because we only had VU meters. They couldn't put peak meters on because they were too expensive. So that's what we work with. But today, we prefer not to work with VU meters if we could. And you say you checked it. That you didn't say how you checked it or at what levels. So I can't really go beyond that except to say check this, and this. Faith from Charlie. I recorded a singer, but now as I mix, her voice sounds a bit harsh. Any pointers on what the culprit might be? Yeah, that usually means that it's the wrong microphone for the singer. One of the keys to engineering vocals is finding a microphone that's very symbiotic with the singer's voice. It's not uncommon for a new engineer with a vocalist, first time they work together, for the engineer to put up 3, 4, 5 microphones and have the vocalist sing in each one and just find what fits best. And surprisingly enough, sometimes it's not the best microphone that you have. One of the fallacies is because you have a what you think is a really good microphone or an expensive microphone, let's put it like that, it works great on everything. And that's not the case. The example would be if maybe she has a very harsh tone to her voice, well, then you'd want the opposite kind of microphone. Then you'd want something that's more of a mellow sound. Something like a dynamic microphone would fit better. And we're always trying to get the opposite microphone from what the sound is, and that helps. So, and the next thing would be the microphone placement. So placement is a really big deal. So it's microphone choice, microphone placement. That would be it. Now that she's there, that if you can't do anything after you recorded it, then usually what you're doing is some sort of EQing. Dynamic EQ works really well. So some AI resonant processors like Soothe, for instance, Soothe 2 might work really well because it'll find the nasty resonant points and you can dial them out. So things like that. From Lancelot. I love this. Lancelot Knight. When it comes to recording guitars and vocals, is it necessary to record multiple takes of vocals and multiple guitar takes, and why? Is it necessary? No, but you probably want to. Did you record it perfectly the first time or sing it perfectly the first time? Probably not. Some absolutely brilliant players and brilliant vocalists, you'd be surprised how fallible they are and how many takes they need to actually get something that's really great. Sometimes just because you sang it perfectly doesn't mean it's a great take or played it perfectly. You want the right feel, so you'll do multiple takes just for that. But it's not uncommon to do dozens of takes, to get it right. One of the things that I see or hear when people send me recordings is that they don't spend enough time on this. They'll record something once or twice and go, oh, that's good enough, but it isn't. And one of the reasons why albums take so long is working on these individual parts until they're right. That's why, many people don't like to record. Like superstars, a lot of them, they don't want to be in the studio because it's not fun. It's really real work. So, yeah, you want to do it until it's as good as you can get it. Not only it's as good a sound, it's as good a feel, and it's as, I don't want to say perfect because perfect is, not exactly what you want, but it really, fits with what you're trying to do. If I think one of the big things that I've found is if a player usually says, "Oh, let me do it again, I can do it better," they almost always can. So you let them do it. If you're the player and you think to yourself, "Oh, that's not right," you don't let it go. You go back and you do it better. And if you think, "Oh, I have a better one," do it. Do it until you don't think like that anymore. Here from Jackie. When tracking rap vocals, what peak levels do you recommend coming in the mix? Well, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter what genre of music, whether it's rap or rock or pop, country, it doesn't matter. Again, the best thing is you aim for like -10, -12. If it peaks a little higher, that's okay. But that gives you, and if it's a little lower, that's okay too. But, kind of aim for that, and that always works pretty well. From Wayne. What do you recommend for EQ settings for violin and cello? I've recorded both flat direct using Cubase 13, elementalism, but having a hard time getting the tones to stop competing with one another. Well, again, this is one of those things you recorded direct, and you're probably not getting the best sound out of the instruments to begin with. That's why we like to use microphones, because you can get better sounds a lot of times than recording direct. Usually direct is thin, and they're where the frequencies that they emphasize are kind of the same, especially if you're using like the same preamp and stuff. So that's a problem where mics might help that out. And again, you probably have a different mic in the cello than you would from the violin, so it would sound different and would fit better right away. The other thing to think about is, I don't know if these were overdubbed, so one was played at a separate time from the other, which it really doesn't matter. What you're, again, trying to do is, instead of just recording it, getting it down, you're always thinking, does this work with the other mix element? So if you already record the violin and the cellist comes in and starts to play, or if it's you, the first thing you do is you listen and you go, is that a sonic fit? And if it isn't, then you'd go in and you'd change something so it sounds better. Again, you'd go, oh, the DI isn't working, so let me put a mic on it, and that would sound better. So you just don't record it, you listen and then record it. You listen and try to make sure everything fits. That's what the pros do. Yeah, so you're having a hard time getting tones to stop competing. So usually the problem, what would make this easy so they don't compete with one another? So now that you have them recorded, what you'll do is make the violin have a little less bottom and the cello a little less top end. So you roll some of the top end off in the cello, you'll roll some of the bottom end off on the violin, and then they should fit a little better together. Might not be perfect, but it's a good place to start. Okay, from Liam. Is it worth using a pop filter on a vocalist if you set up the mic, like you mentioned earlier, above their mouth at nose level? So this is what I meant. You'll find get the best response if it's kind of up here and pointing down your lips, and then any P's, any plosives are going underneath the microphone. You're not recording them. And also the spit is going underneath. So let's talk about a pop filter. A pop filter is not really a pop filter, it's a spit filter. And that's important because when you're getting moisture on a condenser microphone capsule, it will begin to sound different. And it may even get to the point where it will stop working because of all the saliva. So that's why we put those pop filters up there, not for pops, because they don't help all that much with the pops, but they help with this saliva problem. And that's really what's there. But you'll have less of a problem with that if you just place it correctly. And again, go back to the 60s and 70s and go look at the microphone placement. Look at like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and those guys in the studio, and look and see where the microphone is. And it's always kind of up here at nose level, pointing down. From Andy, I've recorded multiple different vocalists where I pick up a lot of throat clicks in their takes. Is there a technique to mitigate this? Either performance side, recording side, or EQ. Throat clicks. Well, again, that's probably a mic placement thing. You probably have it down exactly under their mouth, and so it's closer to here. So if you lift it up a little bit, you'll have less of that. The other thing is, it could be the vocalist. It doesn't have enough saliva. A good way around that is to have a green apple available and have the vocalist take a bite out of the green apple. Surprisingly enough, that does a good job of giving you some extra saliva, giving the vocalist some extra saliva, and that eliminates some of those mouth noises. Oh yeah, so here it is. This is ideally what we want to do. So it's kind of at your nose or even eye level, and then pointed down. And believe me, it's going to sound just fine. Aim it at the lips, but again, you're going to get rid of a lot of those problems, and it'll still sound great. From Rich, do you add or work with EQ or compression on your inputs during recording? We already had one of these, and the answer is, unless you have lots of experience, no. If you have some experience and know what you're going for, and know the mics, know the sounds of everything, then yeah, you might. Okay, from Larry. How do you get the drum bleed off the background vocals and sax tracks? I wear two hats, video producer and editor who has to mix the audio before bringing it into the video. Sometimes the club mix is great, but sometimes this bleed happens to not as good a club mixer. Didn't place the mics to avoid this. Yeah, I mean, that's number one. Actually, number two, the big thing is making sure that all of the musicians are placed in such a way where there's some isolation between them. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this means amplifiers would be turned a certain way. And then the microphone placement is really big in this, because if the microphone placement is incorrect, then you're going to get a lot of bleed. Now, there's two ways to look at this. There's a school of thought that goes, I'm really happy for as much bleed as you can give me because it just makes everything sound bigger. So there are many engineers, especially from back in the day, that don't fear this at all and kind of embrace it. They're perfectly okay with bleed. There are others that have less of a problem or have more of a problem, and in which case, if you have all sorts of bleed, then you either add a gate and get rid of it that way, or go in and use clip gain, for instance, and just pull the gain down, except for when the vocals or sax are playing. It takes some time, but that's the easiest way. Gates are finicky, so you can never be sure that it's working exactly right, but if the levels are okay, then a gate can work, and it's kind of like doing automatically what I was just saying. But clip gain is what everybody would do. They go in and okay, you're singing here in this part, well, I'm going to clip gain everything else down to 0, or sometimes not even down to 0. It sounds better if you bring it down 20 dB and it sounds more natural. From Rich, another one. Your take on captures. I usually capture levels at -24 to -12 and adjust the gain accordingly. I mix raw and clean with volume level, then to appropriate pans, and then EQ is needed. I try to get the Beatles sound. That's always my reference. Yeah, that's not a bad thing. The recordings are still great. But it's a different day, a different mindset on everything, and the way it was done back then, because they had to do it. They did EQ and they did compress going to tape, and the only reason why was they didn't. First of all, they didn't have many compressors Usually a studio might have one or two, so you kind of had to do this. If you knew you're going to compress, then you do that. The other thing is there weren't many tracks in those days, so you had to make sure it was all balanced together, and you'd think ahead, what is this going to be like? As far as captures, you mean recording level? Minus 24 is a little low to me. It's not going to hurt anything, but that's low. I like to see it higher. And again, aiming for like minus 10, minus 12, something like that is usually better. Meaning that if it's too low, you're going to have to bring the gain up somehow with everything. And that usually, that means extra work, first of all, and it means potentially adding noise or, messing up the sound somehow. And Robert, I have a large drum set that uses 14 mics to record. Do you have any advice on EQing, especially at large sets? Do you really need 14 mics? Would be the first thing. Even on a large drum set. Do you really need 14 mics? Because that's asking for trouble. It's asking for phase trouble. So every time I've seen big setups like this with lots of mics, the engineer will be meticulous in making sure that there is no phase issues between them. Meticulous. You can't just put the mics up and go for it. This is something, you spend quite a bit of time getting correct. So the first thing I do is say, do you really need 14 mics? Because it might sound better with less. As far as EQing is concerned, again, every song is different. If you're using all of those drums, it's one thing. If you're not, then why have them on? If you're just using kick, snare, and two hats, cymbals, and hi-hat, why have the other mics on? So it would sound better. But EQing always comes down to it. The drum kit has to sound great first. That means new heads. That means tuned well. That also means a good drummer who plays well and plays hard. So if you have those things, then you have your sound, and you'll have to EQ a whole lot less. And if you're falling down in any one of those things, then you'll have to EQ more. So that's the advice I have. Less is more, but if you're recording, new heads make a huge difference. That's the first thing that happens if you're doing a session for an album session, for instance, and you're going to do drums. Almost always they bring in the drum doctor or a drum specialist, drum tuner, to tune everything up. And it doesn't matter how successful you are, this happens because drum tuner can do it faster. And the very first thing they do, they put new heads on every single time. So take it for what it's worth. And that's it. So thanks, everybody. The next edition, I don't remember what it's going to be, but I know we talked about a couple different subjects so far. I think the next one is actually about EQ. So look out for that. That should be next week. Same time, same place. I'm going to see you then. Before I leave you, you might want to check this out. mixingcrashcourse.com. This is my mixing crash course, and you'll get some EQ tips, some balance tips, and some compression tips, and things that you can use right away in your next mix. So check this out, and I'm going to see you next time.